without talking about the world stage, without looking at those geopolitics, because he himself has said, first day he's in, he's going to, he's going to fix the war in Ukraine. He's going to fix what's happening in Israel and with Hamas. He's going to fix everything. And he's also going to sock it to the Chinese with tariffs. Oh, and he's going to make Taiwan pay to be protected. Now, that, to me, is a really interesting comment. If he even went anywhere near that, the suggestion that the US Army was somehow up for rent. The first US soldier that died in that situation, was he a mercenary? I don't know. If you're paying somebody to fight, they're a mercenary, unless they're on the payroll, right? So lots and lots and lots of questions. And the only person I thought fit to answer them is our friend Jamil Jaffer, founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University in Washington, D.C. Oh, Jamil, so many questions. We're going to need about 3 days to get through these, I think.
Very, very, very possible that we might need 3 days to get through this. But at least we know who the president is, and we're not trying to figure it out over the next 3 days.
Well, that is true. There is some relief in that. Let me first of all ask you about my phone-in later, and I've got loads of people already phoning in and wanting to talk about this. The UK and US special relationship. Now, I don't think it's been that special really since Reagan and Thatcher, but has it? Because they adored each other, right? But have we seen the end of that? Have we seen the end of Donald Trump, even though he's got properties in Scotland, thinking that, the Queen's now dead, thinking that Britain is somehow his busy mate?
Well, I certainly hope not. I think that there's an opportunity to rebuild the special relationship. Whether, as you were just talking about, whether Keir Starmer and President Trump can get along and figure it out, that's a question I think still to be determined. But, there still is this commonality of bond between our nations. We share a point of view on the world. We share a point of view on who our adversaries are. Much more than the rest of Europe, the U.S. and the U.K. Share a view on Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. And so there's a lot of commonality, I think, opportunities to build together. Whether the two personalities can get along, different story. But I think the special relationship still there. It might be softer than, certainly not the Thatcher-Reagan special relationship, but I think there's still a lot to build on, Petri, and I hope that we can, because I don't think we can survive, honestly, without one another. Frankly, we need more of Europe in as well. We need our allies in Asia Pacific to come on board, and really, if we fall, we fall divided. If we stand together. That's the only way I think we succeed, including the U.S. being sort of a nominal superpower, not acting like one all the time. But, I think that we need our allies and our alliances. They need to be strong.
Well, that brings me to the obvious next question, and that is about the NATO alliance. OK. Now, I don't have a problem with Donald Trump in his last presidency making sure that people paid their bit, that they paid their way. I think he was absolutely right to insist that America didn't cover the entire bill. But he's always, I don't know whether he means it or not. It's difficult to get behind this man's brain, really, or get into his brain. Talking about, we don't need to be part of these alliances. It's all going to be America. We're going to build a dome like Israel have got. We're going to build a big dome, a lovely dome, a bigly dome, and we won't need NATO. Right. So is it just chat? Is it just mouth?
It's hard to tell. I'm not sure he even knows on any given day. I think he has a tendency to be concerned about these overseas commitments, our alliances, whether they're the right ones, whether people are doing their part. I think certainly, as you point out, the advocacy to get NATO to do what it said it's going to do, which is to meet its defense commitments and make all the NATO countries do that, is the right thing for everyone. It's the right thing for the NATO countries. It's the right thing for the United States. And it's frankly the right thing to show our adversaries that we can come together. This idea, though, of the U.S. leaving NATO or not upholding our Article 5 commitments is very dangerous, and I think wrong-headed. And to the extent he says that, even if he doesn't really mean it, it's not positive. Now, it's one thing for that to be a negotiating tactic to get our NATO allies on board. It's another thing to say, well, if they don't pay, we're going to leave them out to the Russians. That is not the right thing for an American president to say. It's not the right thing for any of our allies to say. We should figure out how to come together and make this thing work. But it's not the right move, and it's not the right move for the United States. We need NATO. It's true that the sort of the four best things that happen in the United States are the Pacific, the Atlantic, Canada, and Mexico. At the same time, the idea that we can just sort of isolate ourselves, remain at home, and be separate apart from the world, it's been tried before. It's never succeeded. It's always led to a bigger war than the gain that we thought from the quote unquote peace dividend, right? When we're talking after World War I, after World War II, or after the fall of the Soviet Union. And so it's never been true for the United States that it can separate itself from the world. And so this idea that we can just sort of stave off our alliances and do it alone and build a dome or whatever it might be, it's just not the lived reality of our country.
And yet, that seems to be the narrative that he's selling or sold to the American people. These are not our wars. They've got nothing to do with us. The Second World War was not our war. It had nothing to do with us. He just does it. He seems to be totally into this idea of just America on its own protecting itself, and the American people like that idea.
Yeah, Petri, it's a tempting notion, right? It's the idea of Fortress America. It's been discussed for 200 years. America has gone through cycles of isolationism and interventionism, and neither has worked out great for the country. Isolationism has led to major wars. Interventionism has taken us places we probably didn't need to be at times. And so the question, though, is, are you the kind of president who leads the American people and brings them to where they need to be and convinces them when we need to get involved and we need to engage? Or are you the kind of president that sort of takes a poll, assesses where the American people are, and then goes with that? And to be candid with you, for the better part of over a decade and a half, the American people have had leaders in the White House, Democrats and Republicans alike, that have sort of said, we want to be where the American people are. We're going to follow them. We're going to, quote unquote, lead from behind, as Barack Obama said. We're going to leave Afghanistan the way we did under Joe Biden. And we're going to make a plan for leaving Afghanistan and abandoning our allies like we did with the Kurds under President Trump in his first term. So it's not that this has been a Republican or a Democrat thing. It's been a leadership thing. And we haven't had leaders who said, we're going to take the American people where we need to bring them, not simply take a poll about where they are and then, develop our leadership that way. We'll see if this strategy works for Donald Trump over the next 4 years. But, it may very well be. Donald Trump has engaged aggressively overseas when he thought he needed to. He took out Qasem Soleimani at a time when nobody expected him to do that or expected the United States to do that. He played footsie, to be sure, with Kim Jong-un, but ultimately pulled out of those negotiations, and he imposed very heavy sanctions on Iran, and on China at a time when nobody thought he'd be that tough. So, Donald Trump has shown his ability to be tough on the international stage, but at times throwing the Kurds under the bus, preparing to leave Afghanistan. He's also done things that were not that kind of leadership that America needs. And so we'll see what Donald Trump we get now with a Republican Senate at his back, maybe a Republican House, and a clear mandate from the American people.
Now, let's talk a little bit, if we can, about Ukraine and Russia, because the Russians were delighted when Trump won. Were they right to be? Because the idea, and I've been reading a lot about this, as you would imagine that I would, the idea that Trump can go in there and force these two to sit down at a table opposite each other, fine, he might be able to do that. He's going to say to Zelensky, listen, if you don't, we're cutting you off. He's going to say to Russia, if you don't, we're going to let them do what they want with the weapons, and you're on your own. And also, we might be able to do you a bit of deal on some Ukrainian soil, right? So he's going to do, but Ukraine is not. It's not his to give away, and it's not his war to fix, if you like. I suppose he could withdraw all monies to Ukraine, but then the American economy plummets. So what does he do? How's he going to follow through on these statements that he made?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. You're right. It's not our war to give away, but it is a war that the United States has funded with significant amounts of money, significant amounts of weapons,
and made billions.
So I think
made billions from it, and jobs.
That's the
and all those.
Yeah,
things.
That is the interest. That's right. That's the interesting thing about the Ukraine war. A lot of Republicans in the House and the Senate have said, well, we're spending all this money in Ukraine as though we're giving them cash. the bulk of that money, the vast majority, 80 plus, if not 90+% of that, is spent in the United States on American weapons made by American labor. And so, this idea somehow that's a giveaway to a foreign ally. Now, to be sure, we're giving them the weapons for free and they're utilizing them, but they're also utilizing them against one of our biggest adversaries without us putting any lives at stake. So not only are we making money on one end, we're also fighting an enemy without having to put any American lives at stake. So it's a pretty good deal for the United States in that sort of from that sort of perspective. At the same time, there's a lot of people in Congress, including J.D. Vance most prominently, and Donald Trump himself, who said, look, this is not a place we want to be spending money. We should be spending that money here at home on other things, whether that's, on other approaches. And so the question now is, how did he get there? And I think the answer is exactly what you said, which is he's going to tell you, Zelensky, that we're done. And, you need to make a deal. And that probably means something like the current lines of control. Right, Putin is going to see an opportunity, and he's going to argue for more. He's going to argue for the
Donbass
necking down
region,
of the Ukrainian military.
Yeah,
exactly, and more, and maybe even more on land. Exactly, and we'll find some medium. Right, and then the question will be then, what does Putin do in the aftermath? A year or two after he's sort of consolidated his troops, rebuilt his military, does he try to take Kyiv? And what does Donald Trump do, if anything, about that, right? What about Estonia? What about Lithuania? What about all these other countries that are part of NATO that would require an Article 5 commitment on the United States, or the sort of fulfillment of an Article 5 commitment if, in fact, Russia were to invade? These are all open questions, and I think it all turns on how strong a face does Donald Trump present to Vladimir Putin, and does Vladimir Putin believe that? And it's unclear. We don't know whether he's going to simply say, okay, look, Vlad, you can have what you've got and you're stopping there. Or does he put the kind of pressure on that you're saying is, hey, you don't make a deal now, and we're going to give the Ukrainians even more. Remember, Donald Trump was the first American president to give weapons to Ukraine. It's not where he's at today, but it was where he was at right at the beginning of his presidency. Could he triple down on Ukraine in a way that Joe Biden hasn't? Maybe, but it doesn't seem like that's in the cards right now. Still a lot to be seen how this thing plays out, and frankly, how Putin reacts to Donald Trump's effort to get this thing resolved sooner rather than later.
Can I hold you over this break, Jamil? Do you mind? Because I've got so much more I want to ask you about. But if I take a very quick break now, we'll come back to Jamil in just a moment. Hi there, it's Petri here with you until 1, and with me is Jamil Jaffer, who is the founder and executive director at the National Security Institute at George Mason University in Washington, D.C. I should have known better than to think we could get through it in the first 15 minutes. Just picking up on the point we were making before about what Trump might do with Russia and Ukraine. If President Trump is in the White House, and I hear this a lot, that people think, and he's even said it, he's just crazy enough to press that button. So people don't know how far he would go. Therefore, that makes the world a safer place. He already hated, and I totally agree with him on the appeasement of Iran. It was the wrong thing for Biden to have done, right? Clearly it was. There are certain people you just can't appease. You can't, it's not going to work. Ideologies are far too different. Does Trump make us safer because those despots are a little bit scared of his crazy?
Petri, I think there's something to that theory. This is the sort of the so-called madman theory, right, of leadership and of Donald Trump in particular, which I think is a theory that he stokes. Frankly, it's a theory that worked for Vladimir Putin when it came to the war in Ukraine. You saw the Biden administration oftentimes hold back on giving M1 Abrams at a time when Rishi Sunak was ready to give British Challengers, right? You saw us hold back on giving F-16s, on HIMARS, on ATACMS, all because, Vladimir Putin threatened to use tactical nuclear weapons, right? We were afraid the war would expand, right? And so it's not a crazy theory of the world to behave like a crazy person and say, well, I'm just crazy enough to push the button, right? That being said, I actually think that's part of why, there's this whole theory that the Russians wanted Donald Trump to win, or were supportive of him, or, sort of tried to tilt things in his favor. I actually think Donald Trump is less positive for a nation like Russia, because you get a little bit of that crazy, you get a little bit of that lack of knowledge about what might happen, and so that creates instability for you, the other nation. And what you actually want to really engender is instability in the nation you're opposed to. You want Americans to be at each other's throats. You want us to fight. You want to see election violence. You want to see a contested election. So in a lot of ways, Donald Trump winning clearly outright, even though the Russians might see him as potentially more beneficial to them on Ukraine or the like, one, because of the sort of madman theory and his volatility, his own volatility, but second, because it was a stable election, what's going to be a clean transfer of power and a clear mandate, that's actually bad for Russian theory and Russian disinformation and misinformation operations. It's contrary to what they were looking for. And so I actually think that this is not a positive for them in that sense. Whether on Ukraine or not, it's more positive because they might find a path forward and might live to fight another day. Perhaps so. But again, as you point out, right, he may very well, if he's really being tough, he may actually threaten them and say, look, I'm going to triple down on Ukraine. I'm going to give them everything they want if you don't come to the table. That actually might create more instability for Russia and cause them to not push harder.
Let's have a look now at there's so many areas of the world at the moment, but let's look specifically at Israel. Again, Netanyahu absolutely thrilled, calls Donald Trump the best friend that Israel has ever had. I'm not sure that Donald Trump is, you know, if you were best mates at school, Donald Trump might not say Benjamin was his best mate, but Benjamin's going to say that Donald is his, right? So I think that's the position that we're in with those two men. Although, of course, Trump did move the embassy to Jerusalem. That was a very contentious decision and made a big statement to the Middle East about where he stood. But how is Donald Trump going to fix this situation with Hamas and Iran?
Remember, yeah, I mean, look, remember, Donald Trump also got the Abraham Accords done, right? I mean, we all, when he gave it to Jared Kushner, everyone was very skeptical, including me, that is this going to be successful, right? Is this really a thing? But in a lot of ways, that has reshaped the Middle Eastern dynamic, and I think will continue to if he's able to get a deal done with Saudi Arabia, a deal that Joe Biden tried to get done, apparently got very close on, but then the war with Hamas made that difficult. I think Trump will look to try and get this war wound down. I think he's going to liberate Israel to be more aggressive with Hamas, but we'll say, look, the trade for that is, right, we got to get those hostages back. We got to end this conflict quickly. And then we got to get to this next stage of the Abraham Accords and get Saudi Arabia in and get this thing cleaned up. Because I think in a lot of ways, he wants to pull himself out of yet another conflict in the world. Now, Iran, I think what he'll say to Israel is, look, you want to have free reign on Iran? I've already taken out Qasem Soleimani. You've taken out his successor. You've taken out a number of senior Hamas and Hezbollah leadership. I support that. I'm going to give you free reign. I'm going to give you capabilities and resources to do that. But you got to get this Hamas thing dealt with and move on going forward.
Yeah, I mean, he said, didn't he, that he would have allowed Israel to bomb the nuclear facilities. And it was Joe Biden, allegedly, I'm sure Israel would deny this, but that said, no, that's going too far. But at the moment in the region, there's an entire battle group, isn't there? An American battle group. There are American aircraft there as well. And the argument about the Saudi Arabian deal, that's pretty much what caused this to kick off in Israel in the first place. The other parties, Hamas, Iran, did not want to see that strengthening of the region with that deal with Saudi Arabia. So, in fact, if he tries to force that deal through, that accord through, what are the chances Iran's going to take that sitting down?
No, that's exactly right. But then what that does, if in fact that's how it plays out, then Israel and the U.S. are aligned on Iran. And Donald Trump's already made his views very clear on Iran. Iran would be mistaken if they thought trying to cross that line and come harder to the United States was going to be successful for them, because as much as Donald Trump might want to withdraw from overseas engagements and not be engaged, when it comes to countries like Iran and China, his views are very clear. They were clear in his first presidency. They'll be clear, I think, in this presidency. And he's not going to sort of, pull any punches, right? Israelis have already made clear they're going to do what it takes to take out Hezbollah and Hamas leadership. President Trump broke that seal in some ways by taking out Qasem Soleimani. And if I were a betting person, I would say the Iranians, you step very carefully if you're going to try and threaten Donald Trump, is he will not take kindly to that, and he'll come at you hard, and he'll let the Israelis, he may give the Israelis the weapons they need to go after your nuclear facilities. You thought, the U.S. wouldn't do that under a Donald Trump presidency. That is not off the table. In fact, it might be at the top of the list.
I'm with you on that. I absolutely agree with that would happen. Look, finally, and I've got so so much that I wanted to talk to you about. I haven't even talked about the war with the tariff war with China and all of that. But I did want to end on Taiwan with you, because this to me was a really extraordinary statement from an elected president, or somebody who wanted to be elected president. And that is that if Taiwan, because the commitment has been made that there would be help for Taiwan. It's never been quantified. And Donald Trump is now suggesting that if Taiwan want protection, then they need to pay for it. Now, that's a whole different... That's almost a mercenary military. You're charging people for your military. What happens when a soldier dies, an American soldier dies? Is he a mercenary? I mean, what is this? This, to me, is a total a breakdown of an understanding of what a defensive force is for.
Yeah, you know, Petri, I don't think that's necessarily what he meant. I think if I were a betting person as to what Donald Trump was thinking, and it's hard to get in his head, right? And we don't know on any given day what's right. But my guess is what he was in his head was he was thinking about sort of the NATO construct. Look, they got to be part of this effort. They got to be willing to fight for themselves. They got to be willing to put money on the line and double down on it themselves. The problem with that theory when it comes to Taiwan is Taiwan doesn't have a lot of its own money. To the extent it has its own money, it's got U.S. money helping it fund those weapons, right? Now, Taiwan has very successful semiconductor plants, TSMC, right? Maybe he's saying, look, you want to do this deal, you got to give us a good deal with TSMC. It's got to build a bunch of factories in the United States, more than it's doing already, not with U.S. dollars, but with Taiwanese dollars, right? And maybe there's some sort of a, you know, Trump's like a businessman, right? Okay, what's the transaction? I don't think it's about paying for U.S. soldiers, right? And then the question is, okay.
But in effect, it will be.
Well, remember, Trump also said that Mexico was going to pay for the border wall, and he built the border wall, and they didn't pay for the border wall, right? So we'll see how this thing, right, how this thing plays out. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I think what he wants to see is, look, if we're going to be in this fight for you, and I think there's a lot of reasons to think that U.S. troops will never see action in Taiwan, although they should. We should defend that we should defend that friend of ours, even as much as or more so than we're defending our friends in Europe and the like. I think this is a critical thing for Donald Trump. Remember, he's very much focused on the China threat. Absolutely. So I'm not sure he's going to take that sitting down. But does he want to put U.S. troops in the fight? I think probably not, and I think the Chinese know that. So now the question is, how does this play out? But I think the point that Donald Trump is trying to make there, again, if you're reading the tea leaves, reading into his brain, who knows, right? But a good point he's trying to make is, look, if we're gonna do this for you or help you, you got to have some skin in the game too. So what are you going to put on the table? Are you going to buy our weapons, the right ones? Are you going to get your forces ready? Are you really going to fight for yourself? And if you are, right, what are you going to do for me to make sure that, you know, I don't mean me personally, although maybe in him, right? What do you do for America if we're going to do this for you?
Look, whatever's going to happen, you and I are going to be talking a lot over the next 4 years, and I'm delighted about that. Jamil, thank you so much. Jamil Jaffer, the founder and executive director of the National Security Institute at George Mason University in Washington, D.C.